Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome back to my channel and to one of the videos I am most excited to make every year, which is my Booker Prize predictions. I can hardly believe that it has come around again so quickly, but I feel very ready for Booker season to be in full swing once again. The Booker is my favourite book prize. It celebrates excellence in fiction in English, and it has championed some absolutely brilliant books, some of which have become all-time favourites for me. In just a few short weeks' time, we will get a whole new long list of 12 or 13 books, hopefully 13, to get excited about. And I'm here today to have a go at guessing which books the judges might include in that long list. As usual, before we think about predictions, it is worth recapping on eligibility. So what makes a book eligible for the Booker Prize? Well, there's a 14-page document published by the Booker Prize Foundation that sets out the rules for the 2025 prize, and I've read it so that you don't have to, and I'm going to share with you some of the highlights from it. So the first important thing to know about are the dates of the prize this year. We are going to get the long list on the 29th of July, then that's going to be whittled down to a short list of 6 books that will be announced on the 23rd of September, and then the winner will be crowned this year on the 10th of November. What I like about these dates is that the long list and winner dates have basically stayed the same as they were last year, but the shortlist announcement has moved a little later, about a week later. That means there is more time to get excited about and engage with the books on the long list. So if you are wondering if you want to read the whole long list this year, as I intend to, well, time is a little bit more on your side, and I thank the Booker gods for it. One other very interesting change that I noticed was this. The rules say, this year we will not be pre-notifying publishers if their authors have been longlisted. And I assume that is in response to last year's leaks, where I think something like 5 of the longlisted titles were known days before the official announcement. And I think for me that does ramp up the excitement in a way. I like not having it spoiled before it's properly announced. Anyway, on to eligibility. So to be considered for the Booker, a book must be long-form fiction written in English. So no translations are eligible. There's a whole separate prize that the Booker runs for that. And in theory, no short story collections. That said, the no short stories thing is a rule that has been very much stretched to and probably past its limits in previous years. The actual wording of the rule is that a book must be substantial and unified, and that does give a little wriggle room, and so it's possible we might see a short story collection on the list. Eligible books must be published in the UK or Ireland between the 1st of October 2024 and the 30th of September 2025, and that means there is a window of months where books that are on the long list might not yet be available to the public to purchase or borrow from their libraries. Authors must be alive at each stage of the process to continue to be eligible, meaning you have to be alive to make the long list and then still be alive to make the short list or to go on to win. I don't know of an author ever dying during the Booker Prize process, and I really hope that we never have to see that rule put to the test. Okay, here's where it gets a little bit complicated. There is a per publisher limit enforced at the imprint level on how many books can be submitted. That's based on 2 things. 1, the number of long listings that they have achieved as a publisher in the last 5 years of the prize, and 2, whether they are publishing any previously shortlisted or winning authors. The first part of that works like this. So if you have had no books longlisted in the last 5 years, you can only officially submit 1 book. If you've had 1 or 2 books longlisted, you can submit 2 books, and if you've had 3 or more books longlisted, you can submit 3 books. The reason for this cap is to allow all judges to read all of the submissions, but they can read beyond the officially submitted book, and there's this call-in system to enable this. So call-ins are books that have not been put forward as official submissions, but the judges have chosen to bring them into the fold. This year, just like last year, the judges must call in at least 10 books. Publishers can suggest up to 5 additional books as call-ins, and to do that they just have to write this sort of short pitch letter and provide a first chapter. But call-ins don't have to come from these suggestions. The judges can actually just call in any book they want from any publisher. As well as all of this, any previously shortlisted authors can get a free pass over and above any publisher quotas. There are lots of previously shortlisted authors releasing books this year. By my count, I have found 24, although I may have missed some. And I'm not going to run through that whole list because I don't want to, but included in it are 6 former winners. Those are Alan Hollinghurst with Our Evenings, Ian McEwan has a new book coming out called What We Can Know. The Loneliness of Sonia and Sunny is from former winner Kieran Desai. Madame Sosostris and the Festival for the Broken Hearted is by Ben Okri. The Drowned is the most recent novel by John Banville. However, that is a detective novel in a series, so I'm not sure it's very likely to be something that is really a contender for the list. And 12 Post-War Tales is by Graham Swift. But this is explicitly a short story collection, so it's not technically eligible. So it is very possible that a former winner will return for a second crack at the whip, or an author that has previously come close to the top prize but not quite made it. We know that the judges will definitely be reading all of those previously shortlisted authors' books. Speaking of former winners, this year's judging panel is headed up by one. Roddy Doyle is the Booker-winning author of Paddy Clark, Ha Ha Ha, which I haven't read, but Bob the Bookerer has read. And when I asked him, was it a funny book given the title of it, he said it was more like Paddy Clark, Ha. Read into that what you will. Doyle is joined on the panel by 4 other judges. So we've got Ayobami Adebayo, who is a previously longlisted author and was a judge on the Women's Prize last year. And given how intense these judging panels seem to be, hats off to her for taking on a huge prize 2 years in a row. Kylie Reid is another previously nominated author who has mentioned in an interview that when she thinks about what makes a great book, it's story that's most important to her. Chris Power is another author and a man who has possibly my favourite voice on radio. It is just silky smooth and I really like listening to him talk. And the judging panel is rounded out by Sarah Jessica Parker. Yes, that one, Sex and the City's Carrie Bradshaw. I've seen a little bit of criticism about this choice, but to those people I say,
you just don't get it.
I really like that this panel is dominated by authors, but I do think that SJP is a pretty inspired choice because she's got her own imprint and she's clearly a voracious and enthusiastic reader. Overall, I'd say I have pretty good expectations for this set of judges. Okay, right, so if you saw my Booker prediction video last year, you will know that I completely nerded out and went very deep analysing past longlists, and I used that to inform my prediction. The way it informed my prediction was that I came up with a bit of a formula for what makes a Booker longlist. It's not perfect, but it is a reflection of what the last 10 years, well now 11 years of longlists have looked like. And I'll just take you through what goes into that formula. So first of all, by and large, the Booker is dominated by a small number of publishers. I ranked all of the publishers based on their past performance. And of the 130 books nominated over the last 10 years, 89 of them, which is over 2/3, came from just 12 publishers, these ones. So I expect that in any given long list, there will be 8 or 9 books from these 12 publishers, and 1 or 2 of the publishers will likely have multiple books on the list. In terms of particular publishers to look out for this year, I think Jonathan Cape have a very strong set of contenders. They had missed out on the Booker long list for quite a few years, but last year they had 4 books that made the cut, including the book that won, Samantha Harvey's Orbital. And I think the books that they've published in this year's eligibility window are perhaps even stronger. Faber and Faber is also looking very good. They had a rare year without a nomination last year, but it could easily be their time to come back into the spotlight. And then I also think Bloomsbury and Granta have very strong slates this year, to the point where I imagine there have been some very difficult conversations that have taken place when deciding which books to submit. So those are the big players in the Booker world. The remainder of the list, so between 4 and 5 books, it tends to be 1 or 2 from small presses or small indie presses, and 3 or 4 from larger presses and imprints, but ones that are just outside of that top performing dozen. There are typically 3 formally shortlisted authors in the mix, and often one of those is a former winner as well. That is a trend, however, that has been on the wane because it hasn't happened since Kazuo Ishiguro was nominated in 2021 for Clara and the Sun. But on the other hand, we have an unusually high number of former winners releasing books this year. There is often a bit of overlap between the Booker Prize and other prizes. I guess notably this year's Women's Prize winner, the Safekeep, was on the Booker shortlist last year. But one very notable and repeatedly overlapping prize with the Booker is the Orwell Prize for political fiction. And that's usually in the order of sort of 2 or 3 of the Orwell Prize shortlisted books make it onto the Booker long list. That said, the finalists for this year's Orwell Prize included 2 sequels and 2 crime novels. So I think this might be a year where that's not the case. I'm actually going to predict that there are 0 overlaps with the Orwell this year. I did think that Natasha Brown's Universality could make it. It's a book I've read and really enjoyed, but she has recently been announced as the chair for next year's International Booker, and I do wonder if that might be considered a conflict of interest. We could also see Joe Macmillan's The Accidental Immigrants make it, which would fulfill the small press spot as well, because it's published by Blue Moose, but I'm not going to be predicting that one. And then the last of my criteria is that there is almost always at least one unreleased book at the time of the longlist announcement. Last year we actually had 2, including Richard Power's Playground, which wasn't even released by the time the shortlist was announced, which was a bit crazy really. Last year the formula was, by and large, quite a success, I'd say. It pretty accurately described the shape of the long list we got, but the books that I put into each slot weren't quite right, and so I only got 3 predictions correct. I am going to use the formula again and just keep my fingers crossed that it works a little bit more magic for me this year. But at the same time, I think it's just very fun to be surprised by the list, so I am fine with this being completely wrong. And on that note, let's finally get into it. As usual, my predictions are going to be grouped into some categories purely for fun and aesthetic purposes. And my first category is called Sera Sera, or rather Sera Sera, because I think there are going to be 2 Seras on the long list this year. We had the great Paul Apocalypse of 2023, so why not a Sarah Nami in 2025? Anyway, first up is an author that is very well respected but has not yet been recognised by the Booker, which is Sarah Moss and her new novel, Ripeness. This is set across 2 time periods, one in Italy in the 60s, where a woman called Edith helps her sister make a difficult choice about a pregnancy, and one decades later in Ireland, where Edith has moved, when a man shows up claiming to be the brother of Edith's best friend. And this whole situation plunges Edith back into her past. I haven't read this yet, but I've heard people calling it Moss's best work yet, and if nothing else, I think it has the most beautiful cover of all of my predictions, and I'm happy to include it purely on that basis. The other Sarah that I think we might see is one that has been previously shortlisted, and that's Sarah Hall. Her new novel Helm is about a named wind in the north of England. So we have a lot of named storms, but not so many named winds. And this one is called Helm, and it's used as a focal point to tell something of a history of England over a very long time span. And it does that through the stories of people who have come into contact with or been affected by the wind. I think it sounds super inventive, and it's published by Faber. I mentioned before that they are a publisher to look out for this year, but to be honest, they are a publisher to look out for every year. They were notably absent from last year's longlist, but that was the first time in 10 years that they hadn't had at least one nominated book. They have got a number of books that could mark their return to the Booker longlist, and I think they will be back with Helm. My next category is called Births, Deaths and Marriages, which I guess is pretty self-explanatory, and we'll start off with the birth, represented in this case by Roisin O'Donnell's Nesting. This is one that I have read, and I expect quite a few people watching this may have read it too. It was nominated for this year's Women's Prize, although scandalously missed the shortlist, and it is a book blurbed by the chair of judges, Roddy Doyle. This is about a woman called Kira who, shortly after giving birth to her 3rd child, decides to escape her toxic, coercive marriage. It is gripping, it is infuriating, it has relationships that are complex and realistic, and I thought it was just fantastic. It's also very, very well done on audio, and I did this kind of hybrid reading experience with both that and the physical copy, which I found to be brilliant. I would not be surprised to see this on the long list. My next pick is called The Tiger's Share by Keshava Guha. This is a debut novel from the Indian author, and it's about 2 pairs of siblings jostling for family power in Delhi, one of which revolves around the death of a father. From what I've read about it, it's supposed to be witty, darkly comic, and both an intimate family drama, as well as a bit of a state of the nation novel for India. Oh, and it touches on ecological collapse, which is depressingly relevant and timely, and something that the judges might want to bring some attention to. My next pick is about marriage, and that is Ghost Wedding. This is from Irish author David Park, and it has 2 storylines that revolve around a man-made lake on the grounds of this grand Irish country estate. So we follow a World War I veteran as he oversees the construction of the lake for his wealthy clients. And then many years later, we meet an engaged couple preparing to get married in the boathouse by the lake, which has been converted into a wedding venue. I have read this one and really enjoyed it. I think it reminded me in some ways of Damon Galgut's The Promise, and there's some really interesting choices about how like the past and present collide in this book. I have picked it for my predictions partly because it's another one blurbed by Roddy Doyle, who says David Park is one of Ireland's great novelists, although I do think that quote might have been praise for previous work, but it does seem that Doyle thinks Park deserves more praise, and so I wonder if this might be the chance to heap some on him. It's also published by One World, and they aren't always nominated, but when they are, they tend to win. So they've had 4 books nominated in the past 10 years, one of which was shortlisted, and the other 3 won the prize. It's a pretty good batting average for them, and so I think if this makes it over the line, then it is definitely one to watch. My next category is called Three's a Crowd, because all 3 of these books that I have chosen all revolve around 3 characters. My first pick in this category is Wee Pretty Pieces of Flesh by Colwell Brown, and I've read this recently and it is absolutely stunning. It's about 3 girls in Doncaster, which is a city in northern England. We meet the girls when they are in their early teens, maybe slightly earlier than that actually, and we follow them into their 30s. It's a very playful, inventive book. It jumps around in time. It has friendship that is very beautifully and thoughtfully observed. And it's written in this really immersive and intoxicating style that captures the Doncaster dialect. Right now, I would say this is not just my pick for a nomination, but actually my pick as the winner. It really is that good, and regardless of whether it is nominated or not, I would encourage everyone to read it. My next choice is Our Beautiful Boys by Samir Pandya. This is a book that looks fairly chunky, but I think it's shorter than it looks because the text is actually quite big. Anyway, this is about a high school American football team, and after winning a match, there is an incident at a party that leaves someone in hospital. And because nobody comes forward to claim responsibility, the 3 star players are suspended. And the book is about that scandal, but also about how the parents of the boys deal with it and come to terms with what's happened and come to terms with what they learn about their sons. It sounds like a book that could be a really interesting balance of important themes like masculinity and race, but also just a gripping page-turning read. My final pick in this category is Theft by Abdulrazak Gurna. Gurna is a former winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature, which is awarded for an entire body of work, and this is his first new novel since then. This is a coming-of-age story set in the 1990s in post-colonial East Africa in Tanzania, where Gurna is from, and it follows the interconnected lives of these 3 young people as they encounter injustice and prejudice, friendship and betrayal. I've never read any of Gurna's work. I did see some iffy reviews of his last book, Afterlives, but this one seems to have been much more fondly received by readers. My next category only has 2 books in it, and this category is called Family Strife, because it's about families, it's about strife, and also the titles just rhyme with strife, so why not? My first pick in this category is The Imagined Life by Andrew Porter. This is a novel about a man who is going through some stuff in his marriage, and he becomes very focused on trying to find out what happened to his father, who left him and his mother out of the blue when he was just a boy. This was released earlier in the year in the US, and I've heard from some readers over the pond that the prose is really beautiful and it's very well done. Unfortunately, it's not being released in the UK until August, so it is one that won't be available to nab immediately after the longlist is announced, but it is published here by Europa, so it could fill that indie press-shaped hole that we would expect to see filled in the longlist. My other choice in this category is The Other Wife by Jackie Thomas Kennedy. This is about a woman who, from the outside, appears to have a wonderful life. She's got a good job, she's got a partner, a house, a child, but on the inside, she is racked by unfulfilled desire. And she's wondering, like, what if this thing in my life had turned out differently? And all of that bubbles up when she loses someone and has to return to her hometown. This is another book that isn't out yet, but it is released a bit later in July, ahead of the longlist being announced. But early readers, from reviews I've seen, have given this quite a mixed response. finding the characters quite frustrating. But the reason I've picked it is that it's another book blurbed by one of the judges. Kylie Reid says this about it: extraordinary, a story about belonging in liminal spaces and longing for things seemingly just out of reach. A searing, beautiful book. Now, that is not the typical throwaway blurb you get on a lot of books. That is a very genuinely enthusiastic quote about it, and the strength of that makes me think that she might be willing to fight for its place on the list. If you have been counting as we go, you may realise that there are only 3 books left to go in my predictions, and they all fall into my final category, which is called Squiggles, because I couldn't think of anything else to unite them, and they all have squiggles of some kind on their covers. My first squiggle pick is Eden Glassy by Melissa Lukashenko. Lukashenko is an Indigenous Australian author and has previously won the Miles Franklin Prize, which is kind of the Aussie equivalent of the Booker. Eden Glassy is her latest novel, and it was released last year in Australia, where it was longlisted for both the Miles Franklin again and also for the Stella Prize, which is like the Women's Prize equivalent. It has only just come out in the UK, and it's another one published by One World. So the likelihood of both this and Ghost Wedding making it is probably quite low. One World have never had 2 books on the same long list. But I have to say, I am really, really excited to read this. It's another book with 2 time periods. One in the mid-19th century as the colonialist British move in on what is now Brisbane, and a modern story about a very elderly lady who is briefly made famous as Queensland's oldest Aboriginal. It's supposed to be thoroughly historically researched, funny, smart. I think The Guardian even called it horny, and it just sounds brilliant. I think after how disappointed people were for Alexis Wright to miss out on the long list last year, perhaps in 2025 we can have a bit of restorative justice for excellent Indigenous Australian writing. My penultimate choice is The Book of Records by Madeline Teen. This is a new book from a previous shortlistee who was shortlisted for Do Not Say We Have Nothing, and this sounds like a pretty big brain energy kind of book. It's about a father and daughter who move into a shape-shifting building which is made of time. No, not the herb, actual time, like minutes and hours and stuff like that. While they are there, they meet a lot of extraordinary characters who I think may be real people from history. This does sound like a little bit of a challenging read, but at the same time I think it could be really interesting to discuss with other readers. So it being on the list and having lots of people reading it at the same time could make it a much richer experience to enjoy. And my final pick is Sarasvati by Ganek Johal. This has very recently been nominated for the Waterstones Debut Fiction Prize, and it is one that I featured in my most anticipated Books of the Year video right at the start of the year in January. To my shame though, I have had it for ages and I still haven't gotten around to reading it. This is about a river in India thought to be mythical called the Sarasvati, and a bit like Helm, it tells the story of many different characters who in some way have a relationship with it. These characters are also all distantly related and have moved across the world, and so it knits together this really interesting tapestry of family and place and migration. So those are my 13 predictions, and I have to say, I really agonised over it this year. The spreadsheet was out in full force, and as of yesterday, I'd got this list down to like 18 books, and it really pained me to remove those last 5 from the list. It was quite exhausting, but in a very self-inflicted, unnecessary way, but that's how I live my life. The list that I landed on does meet all of the criteria I set out in my formula, except one, which is that there are no Orwell Prize overlaps in my picks. I would love to hear from you down in the comments what you think of this list. Are there any books that you've read and loved, any that you are particularly excited about or would love to see make the cut? And I'd also like you to let me know which books you would like to see on the long list, or which books you are predicting will be there, even if you might not want to see them. I am considering doing another video where I share some of like my wish list picks, ones that I am not predicting, but I'd be very happy to see on the list because I've either read them and loved them or I'm really excited to get to them. So let me know if you'd like to see that video, and I might do it ahead of the long list announcement in a few weeks' time. If you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you wanted to give it a thumbs up. And if you are not subscribed but you would like to see more from me, then there should be a subscribe button somewhere on the device you are watching this on. But until next time, toodles.